Have you ever noticed that mimics are almost always mimicking chests? Let's fix that. I've always really liked mimics. I think they're really cool. And I've made a bunch of them in the past, but they're always chests and barrels and other fantasy setting appropriate objects. But not everything's fantasy. And so those mimics deserve to spread their wings and fly into any setting imaginable. So here's the plan. I think I can make a warband of strange, unusual, weird mimics with whatever object I fancy using that day. And you might be asking, what possible game could you be playing with that warband? And the answer is any game I want to. The message I want to spread is that there are no rules when it comes to gaming or art or anything of the sort. So if I want to play Frostgrave or Forbidden Psalm or anything else for that matter with my little weird warband of mimics, I certainly will be. If I can find some friends to play with me, that is. So our first victim in this potential series is this little guy, a dollhouse boombox, which is surprisingly well made and actually opens up to reveal a tiny little cassette. The Gen Z portion of my audience may not be the most familiar with those, but basically they had about half a song on them. You had to flip it over to get the rest of the album whilst frantically rewinding the tape with a pencil because the machine took an ice age to do it itself. I started off by removing some of the back part as I have plans for this later. I'll tell you right now that when I picked the boombox for the first mimic, I had zero plan behind it other than boombox kind of fun, 80s theme ? Because obviously. But a lot of my bits are missing in action at the moment because I'm moving and I can't remember what bloody box I packed them all into. Oops. I have a few things here, but even then I probably need to increase my bits collection as I'm sorely missing arms and legs and things that aren't just incredibly niche and specific and won't work for every project. So we're probably gonna have to do some sculpting. Something I do have in my bits collection though is a pile of Tyrannid appendages, which are some of my favourite appendages. That sounded incorrect. Tyrannids are cool, okay? So I selected a few arms to get started with. Recently I made some slightly more traditional mimics with these legs, which I loved, so I'm going to use those as inspiration for the ones I'll sculpt, so that everything works together if ever I so choose to use them in the same setting. I made wire armatures for the legs, one of which will be busting out of the back panel here. For extra strength I used a good amount of baking soda with my CA glue and tapped out the excess white powdery residue by giving him a nice pat on the back. Just another 80s raver, having had a few too many good weekends. I drilled some holes into the boombox to attach the other limbs. I've learned my lesson way too many times not to just wildly glue on a limb without a strong connection. The NHS is under enough strain as it is, without the influx of surgical interventions required when your less than careful friend knocks half your models off the table. I pinned in the first arm, which I've chosen as this one with the lash whips I believe they're called. I chose it because for my 80s theme I really want to go in hard and add as many references as I can. So I thought the whip could be a glow stick, or glow whip I guess. You know those things people whip around at raves with the lights in them? You can probably tell I've never stepped foot in a rave in my entire life, but I've seen them in videos, and as we know, you should definitely believe everything you see on the internet. Here's where we're at so far. It's starting to come together in terms of the shape and pose. I'm trying to keep it fairly dynamic wherever possible, but he is a bit on the wide side, so... Oops, he's on the wide side, so we're gonna have to think about a base, probably fairly shortly. He's fine, don't worry about it. And next I need to sculpt these legs. I'm not the most confident green stuff sculptor, but there's only one way to get better. And unfortunately it's not avoid it like the plague, which is what I usually do, so let's get cracking. I started by covering the armature in green stuff and smoothing that out. I knew I was going to have a lot of colour on the model, so I wanted to keep these a little bit more simple, but still matching the vibe of the arms. I used a dental tool to score in some deeper lines and a ball stylus to poke in some holes before I could add an all-over texture.
It was a really fun exercise to think about what would and wouldn't go with the boombox, and I have a drawer full of other random toys and objects I'd love to make into mimics. So please let me know in the comments if this is a series you'd like me to continue in the future. Next, I worked on the open mouth, which had to be the tape slot, of course. Most of these things would end up eating the magnetic tape right out of your cassette eventually, so it's quite apt. These are teeth made of translucent polymer clay that I'd made for a previous project and just cut down to size. You may notice that off camera I stuck on another arm, which I apparently forgot to film, but we'll get to that a bit later. I gave him a tongue long enough to impress even your Auntie Sandra, and then while letting the green stuff cure, I got on with the base, and a few more references I wanted to sneak in there. Nothing says 80s like a Rubik's Cube. I even made sure that the colours I was painting were a possible scramble by mixing up my cube and copying it. I guess it's a good thing any semblance of illusion that I'm not just a gigantic nerd has died a death long ago, or else I think painting an accurate Rubik's Cube scramble onto a wargaming miniature might just have been a massacre.
And if you'd like to support me making more weird things like this, please consider checking out my Patreon. I'll leave the link in the description below. All of the support over there enables me to keep making videos and projects over here.
For the base itself, I grabbed some tree bark, which is one of my favourite things to use for rocks. I intended to cover the gaps with some wood filler, which as it turns out was drier than your mum's Sunday roast, so I mixed up some sandy paste manually and slapped that on.
So it's the next day and we are starting from here. I've hand primed in white so that we don't cover up any of the clear parts, and now I just need to decide on a colour scheme. I always hate that part, I can never really decide, but I think what will help with the neon colours popping would be to make the boombox black, so maybe we can start from there.
So I began painting it black just like I'd planned, and then something in my head told me the black wasn't right. Most boomboxes were actually silver. I felt like the black might be too flat and not show up as well, so I changed plans and painted it silver. Spoiler alert, maybe not my finest idea. After that, I continued my stunning record of decision making and started painting the limbs purple. In my head I had the idea that this being 80s themed and all, it should look like someone just spewed an industrial quantity of Skittles all over it and have all the colours everywhere. I think I've just gotten a bit tired of doing so many projects that are all grimdark and black and brown and more brown with the occasional tan, and whilst I still love that style and will continue doing it forever, I just found recently that I've been itching to do some bright ass colours on things. My too much gene does need a bit of reining in though. One thing on this initial base coat pass I do like is this arm. I couldn't quite decide what I wanted it to be and how to fit it in with the theme until I asked on my Instagram, and the wonderful Zambies hit it right on the head. A Nerf gun. And then when about 10 other people replied the same thing, I knew it had to be. I will admit now that I was not technically in existence in the 80s and rather grew up in the 90s, so thought Nerf guns were a little later. But I did for once look it up, and Nerf guns were released in the 80s, and so absolutely count. I of course went with the iconic orange and blue Nerf colours that I remember before giving everything a few washes and dry brushes for detail.
So it kind of sucks. Maybe it doesn't suck, that's harsh, but it's not quite coming out the way that I envisioned. I think changing the colour from black to silver has thrown off the general vibe I was going for, and all of the colours, it just isn't working. I didn't have the greatest plan to set out with, so maybe that's the problem, but this is what happens when you make things. It would be nice to not show this in the video, I guess, and just have a lovely finished project, but in reality, there's usually a stage where you hate it and lose all confidence, at least in my experience, and that's what usually happens to me. So now what? Do I start again? Do I paint all over? I could do. I don't want to. My painting skills leave a lot to be desired, so it might not even get any better. Or do I just continue on the line that I'm going on? I'm leaning more towards the second option and just getting it finished, and maybe we'll get better the next time.
So here's what I decided on. I think the purple and teal limbs looked cool, but for another model. There was just too much going on, and my colour theory really isn't that great, to be honest. I'm working on it, but something about the tones of everything just wasn't working. I'd also given the base a simple grey paint job, you know the drill, base, wash, dry brush. Nothing fancy here, as I knew I'd be covering a lot of it. I drilled some holes for the legs. We don't want this guy hitting the deck the second anyone breathes in the next room, and his power stance leaves a lot to be desired in terms of stability. I used some coat 5-minute epoxy here for a bit of added strength and held it carefully in place to set. If this stuff takes 5 minutes, that must be the same 5 minutes your dad claims it'll be till he picks you up an hour away and he's still on the sofa watching reruns of Top Gear. Once that was finally set, I started decorating the base with our additions. I decided to go for a snowy base with this model, partly because I hadn't done those before, and partly because it might be a nice way to tie all the models together if you guys do want to see a series of them. With the snow paste, I layered on a good amount and made sure to hit all the high points. The purple and teal colour scheme has lived on in the cassette round the back of the base here. My handwriting is shocking enough at full scale, so just imagine it's the same as any moody teen mixtape of yesteryear, just full of the cure. I layered up more snow, ready for the ground scatter, shall we say. Of course, we can't have a Nerf gun without Nerf darts. I made these out of polymer clay and painted them the same iconic orange and blue. These were very fiddly to paint, so I'll be hiding those sins under some more snow. I'm envisioning a long raging Nerf battle here, so it makes sense to me. And then the last thing to do was to add the detail that actually originated my idea. When I thought about making this model, the first thing I thought of was doing neon dripping colours flowing from every orifice of the boombox. But it was at this point that I got the go-ahead and had to start moving house, and didn't get a chance to buy the neon paints to make that happen. So as I became dangerously close to getting landlord specialed and painted into a wall under a few coats of magnolia emulsion for overstaying my lease, I had to do what I could with what I had and chose the closest colours available to me. And then realised I wasn't happy with it, ordered the neons when I got to my new place and repainted them all. I think it looks much better now. And here he is, all finally finished. Because of all the moving chaos, this became a bit of a project for just one mini, but it was a great learning process and something out with my comfort zone. Did I still absolutely too much all over it? Yes, indeedy I did. But maybe next time I'll chill out a bit. Or probably not. But thank you so much for watching the video. Please like and subscribe and check out the Patreon and all the good stuff, and I'll catch yous after.